One of Baldwin County's foremost historians, Miss Davita Hasty, recently passed away, and all historians, those who love history, or those who love the nature and the beauty of Baldwin County, lost a tremendous, tremendous support person, a person who fought for saving the county's history and for preserving the natural beauty of this county. She did so all of her life. Today at Baldwin County's Bicentennial Park, we dedicated a very small portion of that park to the memory of Davita Hasty. The park's opening 1,300 yards of the Davita Hasty Nature Trail was dedicated today to Miss Hasty for her efforts on behalf of all Baldwin Countyans to preserve that natural history and to showcase it in a way where the following generations will be able to learn and be able to pass that on to their families. A series of reenactors, participants creating demonstrations of Baldwin County's past, including basket weaving, quilting, and so on. We're on site today to honor Miss Davita Hasty and to bring back some of those memories of the past and refreshing them, and to show those things to some county residents who may never have had the opportunity to have witnessed churning butter or making homemade sauerkraut. Today we paid tribute to Miss Davita Hasty, the foremost historian in Baldwin County, a beloved friend of mine and everyone who knew her. And today was a truly wonderful day of visitation and of dedication to her memory and to what she loved, which was the history of this county and its natural beauty.
I am churning butter. Volunteered to do that. I guess in the day they would have taken the cow's milk and they set it out to almost sour in a bit, and the cream comes to the top. That was skimmed off. That would go into the churn. And I think they say it's like 60 degrees to room temperature is best for churning butter, for it to turn pretty quickly into butter. And that's what I'm doing now. It's just working on that. It's starting to form up ever so slightly, and I've been working on this for about an hour and a half now. So then after that, after it's ready at the process there, the buttermilk or the water will be poured off, and then we have to start washing the butter and pouring ice cold water over it and mashing that other buttermilk out of it, or it would go rancid. And then it could be poured into molds or formed into rounds or rolls and kept chilled. It's not as convenient as running to the local grocery store. Is it?
I am weaving baskets with commercial reed, which is the closest to honeysuckle. We start with what is called a spider. You take 12 pieces of reed and you crisscross them, and you make the spider, and then you start with your weavers going around and you do an over and under pattern. And hopefully you will get a finished product that will look something like this, which will make a nice little trinket basket or flower vase or something like that. And you can make anything from this size down to a smaller size, a little size, or even they made great big baskets. You can even have big baskets like this. By continuously adding in pieces of steak, you can make a basket. They can get, any size you needed. And they used whatever was available. They used reed, they used vines, they used grass, whatever was available. This basket right here is what is called, it's a Creek traditional sifter. You see the holes in the bottom where they used it, and they was able to sift their flour, which they made from acorns. That's a small sifter, and this is a traditional tray. It doesn't have any holes in the bottom, and it has a different weave on the side. This was made mostly from river cane. Okay. These baskets that's on the table, these were made from vines. This vine was a wisteria vine. But you can also use honeysuckle, jasmine, grapevines, and just any other vines that you can find out in the woods. Basically what the Indians did, they used what they could find. They were very good at not wasting anything. So like I said, we will go over and then under And it gets pretty repetitive after a while of going over and under. But it's very rewarding when you get finished. And you have to pay attention, because one slip up means you have to take a lot out. Because there's no fixing if you make a mistake. You have to take it out. You can't just hide it. And there's no talking. That's just basically it. You have to just watch, because it's just repetitive. Now, if I wanted to make this sturdier, I could cut some more reeds and insert them in, and it just make it sturdier. And this basically what I would do, I will continue doing this around and around. And this determines the size of the basket. And it's already wanting to turn up the sides. But if I don't want it to be small, like it's trying to turn up and curve up now, I will just take it and force it to not do that. And I'll keep forcing it to be flat and keep working it around. And that way, the larger I make the base, the larger the basket will be. And of course, that's obvious.
What we've got here in front of us is some homemade sauerkraut, or what will be homemade sauerkraut, in about 2 weeks. And it's really simple to make, and we've been making it for as long as I can remember. My mama and my granddad taught me how to do it when I was a kid, and we've been making it for the last 40 years. What you do is basically get cabbage predominantly grown in your own garden, because it's always better that way, but in this case we had to buy some. But what you do, get for a regular sized churn, get about 10 or 12 head of cabbage. You want to cut it up finely, kind of like you're making slaw, but not nearly as fine of a cut. Once you get it all cut up, what you do is put a handful of cabbage in the churn, like so. Get a handful of salt, spread it around, and get ready to pack it down. Now use kind of a good fluid motion to pack the cabbage in. You want to get it completely covered in the juice that will come out of the cabbage as the salt pulls the juice out of it. Once you do that, you want to get it packed down pretty tightly. It takes quite a while to do it. I'm speeding up through this to let you know how to complete the process. Once you do that, repeat with a double handful of cabbage again, handful of salt, get it in there, and continue packing it down until you reach about the 3/4 level of the top of the churn. Once you do that, the next step is to seal it. And to seal it, what you do is take a couple of old, in this case, a couple of old flour sacks that we've had for 30 or 40 years, probably longer. You'll put down a layer of some cabbage leaves. You'll put down one of these cloths. You'll take any kind of heavy weight. This is just a rock that we've got that won't affect the taste. Put it on top of that cloth, cover it up with several more pieces of cloth. Then you cover the top of the churn itself, tie it off, put it in a dark area, a garage. If you've got we used to put it in a corn crib, but you can put it anywhere. Check it every 3 or 4 days to make sure the cabbage is completely covered with moisture. Make sure it's got plenty of water. Take a taste of it to see if it's getting salty enough, to see if it's actually turning into sauerkraut. You'll know at that point in time whether to put more water, whether to put more salt. About 2 weeks, you check it again, it's more than likely going to be done. Take it out, put it in jars just as though you're canning tomatoes or beans or anything else. Seal those jars, and you've got sauerkraut.
This is an antique quilt owned by Mrs. Laura Reinhardt from Mifflin. And it's not really a quilt, it's a coverlet, and it will more than likely never be completed because of the antique fabric, and these fabrics cannot be found and matched today. And it's smaller, it will not fit on a bed, so it would be difficult to quilt this today. The ladies would have made this is a star within a star, and they would have made a pattern and then cut it out. And you see a star within a star on this pattern, and it has 4 pieces. And these 4 pieces would have 1/4 of an inch added on each side for the seam. And then of course it would be hand sewn, just as this quilt is all hand sewn. This quilt over here is a 2-4-6 triangle, and it's all the same design, and on the inside it's plain. This is a pinwheel quilt that's of the same kind of matching design. It appears to have been made by the same person, and it's been in the family a very long time by John Jackson's family. These quilt pictures over here is by Mrs. Frances Collins Bernard. She made and donated this quilt to St. John's Catholic Church, and it sold for $700. All of these photographs are 22 quilts that she's made, and she's on her 22nd quilt now, and it's almost finished. This quilt is all hand embroidered, and these quilts are all handmade. And then we have a quilt stand over here that's a little portable stand, and the person would have put their quilting material in this stand and sat here and quilted until they got it so big that they had to take it out of the stand and go to either a larger stand or just sit in their lap with it in their lap and quilt it.
Well, we're here at the Bicentennial Park because we wanted to do something on behalf of Devita Hasty, who we lost, a very good friend of all of ours that we lost here a few weeks ago. And she started the park, and we decided that and this was in our plans prior to her death. And we just decided today was a good day to set up so we could display some of the things that we had in mind for the park for today. And this is one of the stoves. Now this was no doubt in the late 18th or early 19th, and the stoves as and these are tools that they use. They put wood in them, like this one, they put it in, and then they got taken this tool and would take the ashes out. This one, they would move the wood around inside of the stove, and as it burnt, then they would take the coals out. And I'll put all this back in place here. And this was a piece, after the stove gets so old, they put tin in the bottom of it to keep it from burning through on the floors in the house during that era. And this is a lantern that they use at one time. They use it for household, but then they start using it for hunting. And this also is a lamp here. And these are small tools. This is a sharpening rock. This is an old screwdriver with the wooden. Everything in those days had wooden handles on them. And these are tools here that they carpenters used, and this was to scrape down paint and stuff like that. And also, this was what they used to cut ropes and even do they had to cut leather to make farm equipment with, and the horse harnesses and all that kind of stuff they did. And this was one of the best tools, so they had to use this to knock wood down every place and knock things in the ground. And these are wedges. At one time, we had steel wedges because we had to do so much hard work, and you can see how it's battered at the top. In later years, we got smart enough, we started using wood. We didn't have to beat on them so hard. And this is a two-way axe here. You use an axe and a pick. You had that. And this is just a small, and I do believe that this one here particularly was just cut away so much they just cut it down to being small. It looked like an Indian hatchet there. And this is a coffee grinder, and that's what we use to grind coffee with. And this is just a regular vise that they had to use during those days, and it come in all kind of pieces. You see it's worn as well. This was a Christmas tree stand at one time. Yeah, and this is how we had to set up at Christmas time. And I'm going to admit this because this hooks on. This is coal oil iron. After we promoted ourselves from going outside, putting these on the wood fire, and this was a major pressing iron. This is what they used to press suits with. This was regular household, but this one here, they press suits with that. They had to have something heavier to press suits with. Now this is an oil can that they use and still use similar to that now, but everything is basically spray. And these are for decoration. This is a wooden porcupine, and these are all my ornaments here that goes with that. And this is all purely for decoration. I have no kind of history about this at all. And these are just really little ornaments that we have to decorate with. And I'm going to go on down here. And this is something that we had to use forever. If you didn't have, I'm all right. It didn't have a well, if you didn't have running water, so you had to use the pump. And this was how the pump did. With this, you had to use leather on that, and you had to pour water down in it to prime it, and then you had to start pumping with it to make the water come out of the ground. And at the end of the pipe, you had a strainer down there, and it would be about 6 feet or so long, that you had to keep the water and the rust and stuff from coming out of the ground on that. And this is our wash tub. This is what you had to use to take a bath, and some of them were bigger than that. You had to use it to take a bath, you had to wash greens in them, you had to use it for everything. Yeah, you had to use it for everything. And this is just the vase that that I have here, and it's old and antique. It's been around for many, many years. And this is kerosene can. This is how we had to have kerosene. You had to buy it by the 5 gallon or more, because if you ran out, you'd have to walk and get more. So nobody didn't want to walk or ride a horse then to get it. And this was a water pail. This is how we kept water in the house. And I didn't bring a dipper with me. I was in such a rush this morning. And these are pots. Well, let me go down the front way here. These are the aluminum pots. Now, these are all very old. And this one here, particularly, when you kill hogs, and you would make cracklings from the sides of the hog, and you had to boil them in the pot. And when you got ready to take them out after they boil for so long, you let them cook and get done. And you go down in and you take them out and you let it drain off. And when I was a boy, you would take a piece out of one, you know, and put in. It was still hot. And this is also a cooking pot that we had during that era. Hey, let me stay with the cooking for a little bit. And these are wash pots, as you can see. And these are washboard. They had that, and I'm going to show you what they look like. They had, and these are, it's one glass and one is metal. And these are the pots that they use to wash clothes with. And the same token, they use a smaller pot like this always for cooking, unless they had an excessive amount of food that they had to cook, then they would use this one. But the big one was basically for washing clothes. And over here, this is a corn sheller. And I'll move this over a little bit. But that's how you would shell the corn for chickens and hogs or whatever you needed the corn for. That's how you would shell it. And here is a sausage grinder. When you kill the hog and you cut part of the meat, the lean part of it off, you make hamburgers and things like that. And that's the way you would grind it up with this one. You just keep grinding it, and you had to spend days doing it. You didn't get it today, you'd finish it up tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, okay. I'll get this back on there. All right. Now, I'm over here. I'm just going down the front row. This is a regular lawnmower, and to me, this was a lot of work, but that was the only way you could cut grass. And this is a Georgia stock. Now, this is one of the plows that was a total necessity in farming, for the simple reason you had different blades that you could put on and do different work. As time went on, you could work different pieces, and you could change around, especially when your corn started getting up about this high, you had to go between it, right at the edge of, and cover up the grass in it. And that's what you use all these different plows for. And this one here, when you laid by, this is a middle buster. And when you laid by, you went straight down the middle of the row, and you threw dirt. Now all this was pulled by horse or mule, and you threw dirt to both sides of the row so that you would get all the grass and stuff, and it would go real deep, and you'd have a bed built up around your corn or cotton, whatever when you have a big bed about that high built up, and keep the grass from coming up around it. That's what this was mainly for. And on this one, it's a regular garden tool, and a man just could push it. He can just push it, and this is the way he did small garden with that. Not a big garden, because he used a horse in the big garden. Back here, this is something. Let me show you how this worked. When you had cotton or corn, mostly cotton, that you would take a sack like this and you put the cotton in. And you just put a little wedge. Let me show you what the little wedge look like. You put a little wedge in it like that, and this would be made onto that, and you just fold it right in there like this, and you slide it down in there, and you would have a sack full of cotton, and then what you do, put this on top of this. Let's leave it loose now. And you see, now, and you see if you had a sack full, okay, Porter, just leave it. No, and you could pull it, and the weight would bring the, and this is how you figured out how many pounds that you had in the sack. That's how you figure the poundage out for a sack. Okay, I'm gonna hang this back a bit. And that's how they weighed and paid people for picking cotton. That's how they did. And this is a singer tree. This is what you use with mules, but this is a homemade one. They made it out of steel. And believe me, the old people were good with doing stuff with welding stuff. They were very good at that cutting iron and welding. They were very good. And this is a puller that we used to use to pull up, like you pulled up hay to the roof of a barn. You put these, you'd have a board sticking outside, and you'd have this up on top of it, and you'd hook the hay to the bottom, and you'd pull these, and it would roll it right on up to the roof to you. Then you'd take it off and store it in the roof. And this is a regular crosscut saw that we have, and this is part of the wedge family that they use for different things. And I want to show you this while we're here. This is they call it a brace and bit. The handle is a brace, and this is a bit here that you just slide in like that, and you did holes. And really, a lot of people built their barns and different things. I'll put another one in. Where is it? They built their barns and things by putting pegs in between it, especially. And see, you can just change bits on it like you do now with modern tools. And I'm gonna put this one. Yeah, still use that. And this is another bit, and that's a hatchet there. They used to cut on the side of the trees. I'll make it fast. They used to cut on the side of the trees and mark the trees as they go in the swamp, and they would, when they come out, they would know how to come out when they'd come out. And this is a regular old hammer, and these are crosscut saws. Now this is a one man, and these are for two men. And what they did with this, they saw all the timber was cut at one time with crosscut saws. And this one here was a regular household saw. And that's what that one's for. And that's a carpenter's life. They're a planer. And whatever he had that didn't work, he would plane it down. And this itself, when you go logging, and you had to put pegs in logs. Everything in the olden days was about putting pegs in everything. That's the only way you could keep it together. And you would put this down in a log, and you would turn it like that and bore a hole, and then put a peg down in it, and you put wire around that peg, and that's the way they would tie trees together to float them down the river. That's how they would do it, like with that. Okay. Okay. And this is an old hoe that everybody used. This was one of the main tools that they used home and garden. These were ice picks, ice tongue, that's what they call them. And then you'd carry, they had them where you carry up to 100 pounds of ice. They had that you could, they were bigger, but you could carry 25 to 50 pounds with that. And these are squares, T-square. Now this, at one time, this was a carpenter's life, a T-square ruler, and this with where else is that? With the hand saw. And that was all the tools that basically a carpenter would use to build a house with. And he had to use his own eyesight to keep it level from there on. And this is something they used to cut. It's just like a bayonet. They would cut their way down through it like a machete. They'd cut their way down through the swamps too. They'd cut them around through the vines and things. These are old cooking pots. I'm gonna make it fast. And those are regular frying pans that they use. And this itself is a horse bridle. You see how that is? And this is the way you control when you're riding a horse, a saddle on a horse. And these are horseshoes. Both of these are horseshoes. And this is a harness. I don't have the collar to it, but this one around, this is what we use around the horse or mule's neck and use the plows over there with. And this is another type singer tree. This one was factory made. This singer tree here was factory made, and it hooked onto the plow so you could pull it. And this is a regular stirrup that a saddle, when you rode a saddle, this was an old stirrup. That's what they had. Had just a small line in it. You wouldn't believe it. You see the cowboy stuff and you think that everything was big and fancy, but it wasn't. Okay. And right here, when you have the, I'm going to pull it out from up here. I'm sorry, dude. When you have the harness on the horse, you'd put this across his back, or the mule, and so the chain wouldn't rub on his side. And you had to keep the chain away from his side, so you had him up like that, and you'd have him on these chains on each side as you would ply him from day to day. You'd have to put that on him to keep him from the chain from rubbing his side. And these were one of the farmer's greatest tools were traps, because he trapped everything that he could find that was walking. That's what he used these for. And they had big ones, they had small ones, they had all kinds. All right, so that just about do all of my presentation for this time. And I sure hope that you all be able to enjoy looking at some of this in the future. Here? Okay.
August 30th, 1813, there was a Creek uprising in North Baldwin County. What had happened was, after the Battle of Burnt Corn, the Creek Indians were angry about the white people moving into the area. And so the white people who had moved in had come in wagons, headed southward and then westward, got a little bit afraid, and they were worried about possible uprising of these Indians, attacking them. And so they crowded around the home of Samuel Mims. He was a wealthy trader and had a line across the river, a boat to pull people over on their wagons so they could cross the Alabama River. And so they came to his home and they made a fort around that, and so that the people could get inside. And there were men, women, and children, black and white, mixed breed Indians, and soldiers were there too. And they had heard, Major Beasley was told that the Indians were coming to the area, but nothing had happened. So they thought this could not possibly be so. And so it had rained a lot, and the gates had silt around them. There was sand everywhere, so the gates couldn't be opened or closed. And I think the men and women were inside, not thinking anything was going to happen. But at 12 noon on August 30th, 1813, when the dinner bell rang, everybody was lining up, the soldiers, the men, the women, and the children, and 1,000 painted warriors stormed Fort Mims. No one was prepared. They say that over 500 men, women, and children died there. They said the blood was ankle deep, and it sounds like such a sad and gory sight for such a beautiful area. North Baldwin County, history was changed forever. Andrew Jackson came to the rescue, and their battle cry was "Remember Fort Mims." And he came down, and our great-great-great-grandfathers, 2 of them were riding with Jackson, and they came to avenge the deaths. They went on from Fort Mims to the Battle of New Orleans, and after that they came back, and the Indians were forced on that sad trail of tears. History was changed. Andrew Jackson went back north, and he became the president. So in our little area, little quiet area of North Baldwin County is where the history of our area began. Settlers moved in, and after the Indians were cleared out of the way, thousands moved southward and then westward. And that's the story of Fort Mims.
In Alabama to start public school. And the Blab School, as they called it, at Boatyard Lake, was considered to be one of the earliest endeavors.
You saying Blab School, B-L-A-B?
Yes.
And welcome to the first public school in the state of Alabama. John Pierce moved about 2 miles from the Mims place, which is today Fort Mims, and began what has come to be known as the first public school in Alabama because it was built by local citizens and was open to the community. The John Pierce School at Boatyard Lake was probably a log cabin with log benches. Most likely, the only books were by the teachers, were owned by the teachers. And we do have records that Mr. Lane was one of the teachers who was known for taking his ruler, throwing it at one of the students and telling the student to bring it back to him so he could diligently flog him for not doing his lessons. All of the lessons were done aloud, and the name Blab came from that because the students would be reciting different things at different times. One child would be saying his times table aloud, while another child was reciting a poem that he was required to learn aloud. At least grades 1 through 8 or 9 would have been held in this one-room school, which did stay into existence until about 1835 or so. There was not a public school system in Baldwin County until the late 1800s when Mr. Lambert took the office and began organizing the schools, and by that time there were at least 88 small schools in Baldwin County. But the 1799 John Pierce School at Boatyard Lake still holds the recognition for being the first public school in the state of Alabama.
Crane is a peace bird of the Creek people. And the Creek people stomp dance. Hopefully one day y'all will see that here. And of course 4 of them's dancing around, 2 men cranes and 2 women cranes. And then this one right here is a man and a woman. They had a child, and they were fish pond grinders. The medicine symbol is for the grinders. Right. Right. That goes back to my grandparents. This right here is a basket woven completely out of grapevines. It has no nails, nothing else, no string or anything else in there. The lady that wove this, she's up here at the pavilion right now, and she's doing the cane baskets right now. This is woven out of palmetto, like it's around here in the swamp. This was actually done by the Homely Indians, my wife's tribe, and they said that they could weave these baskets so tight that they could actually carry water in. Wow. And it's totally out of palmetto. You see no strings or anything else in there. Right here, of course, we've got some of the points and stuff. Now, most of these are replicas that we carry around with us for shows. This would either been an Atlatl point or a knife point. A lot of people mistakenly call, a lot of the points arrowheads, But actually what it was a throwing spear that they utilized. This one right here would have been a knife. It's too deep to be an Atlatl point. This is an axe, kind of like the one over there that I have on the canoe. And this right here is a little knife that they would have taken. They would have taken a point like this. Got a handle, put it on there, put it in the neck sheath around their neck, and let it hang like the beads and stuff. And this one's big enough that you can resharpen it. It will cut you badly because I've been cut by it before trying to get it out of the box. Their ideal woods were cypress, there was some out of cedar and yellow poplar. And there has been some documentation where some were out of pine. This one right here is out of yellow poplar. What they would have done after they felled the tree, they would have taken and they would have dug a small trench along the top of this log right here to put their coals in and let the coals and the fire do the work for them. They do the same thing again. They would take a stone implement, chop away the charcoal, exposing good wood and letting it burn down. Now as it burned down, the wood sides and everything, to keep them from burning, they would have utilized clay.
Well, my name is Henry Skinner, and I'm here at the Bicentennial Park in Baldwin County here near Stockton. I'm here today just to portray the War of 1812 militia soldier that would have been in the area, this would be part of the 1st Mississippi Militia, territorial militia that was in this area. It's been a long trip, and hopefully we'll soon be done. And then after I escort him, I will be joining the Mississippi Militia at Fort Claiborne.
Good afternoon. We are the staff from Fort Morgan State Historic Site down in Gulf Shores. We are actually here at Bicentennial Park going to do a demonstration of field artillery, loading and firing procedures. What we're actually firing today is the model 1841 6-pounder used extensively in the Mexican War and to some extent during the Civil War. We know at the fort, at the start of the war, there were actually a couple of these guns there being used by the Confederacy. And of course at the fort we generally fire the much larger heavy artillery guns which can't be brought to the field. And that's one of the reasons why this is called a light artillery piece, because it is mobile. You can hook it up to 6 horses and a carriage basically that holds the limber chest or the ammo chest on it, and move it into the field of battle, move it around on the field of battle. And generally this gun is crewed by a total of 8 men, but today we'll be doing diminished gun crew drill. We're actually going to use only 2 gun crew members and myself giving commands. And what you'll see is one gentleman operating or working the front of the gun, the muzzle of the gun, and another gentleman working here the breech. So we will begin the gun drill now with the command gunner's post. As you see, everyone steps to their positions. Load. At the command load and diminished gun drill, this gentleman here will walk to the rear, to the ammunition chest, the limber chest, and he'll actually remove a round from the chest itself, place it into the leather pouch he has, and then return to the front of the gun, awaiting the next order to actually begin loading. 10 vent. At the command 10 vent, this man, he's actually going to run the priming wire, this brass wire, into the vent to check to see if the vent is clear, if it's clogged with anything or not that needs to be removed before firing or loading the gun. Okay, from the vent. Load. You see, he uses the round into the tube and just uses his thumb. And the reason why he's using his thumb, of course, is if the gun were to go off prematurely, unprepared, basically it saves him from losing an entire hand at this point in the process. Ram. At the command ram, he will ease the rammer in, pushing the round all the way to the rear of the tube itself and seating it.
and immediately step back to his post just outside of the wheels. Prick the piece. Now, prick the piece, he'll actually insert the priming wire or prick into the tube and through the vent in the top. And what this does is it's going to open up, of course, the powder bag, spilling out the powder. Prime. At the command prime, the gunner here will insert the friction primer, which is basically, just withdraw that real quick. Friction primer is basically your brass tube with a wire extending out. When the gun is fired, the wire is pulled, serrated on the end, just the same thing. What happens inside of the tube is the same thing that happens when striking a match. And it'll shower the interior of the barrel with sparks. Stand clear. Battery, fire! Worm the piece. At command one, worm the piece. Once the gun is fired, the gentleman outside of the wheels will step in and he actually inserts the worm. It looks like a corkscrew. If you've ever seen or been near artillery, see this thing looks like a corkscrew to open a wine bottle. And what it's going to do is he sends it down the barrel, twists it a couple of times, withdraws it, and in so doing he's going to remove any type of trash inside the barrel. And of course here what we're dealing with is simply aluminum foil. That's what we use to roll our blank rounds in. All right, now remove it. Okay, and the next command will be wet sponge. At the command wet sponge, as you notice, he used the rammer earlier. On one end is the rammer itself, and at the other end is a piece of cloth material. This is your sponge, and you wet sponge the interior of the barrel to extinguish any burning embers that are inside of the barrel itself. That way, go ahead and sponge, please. That way, whenever you insert the next round, you don't run the risk of the gun going off prematurely. And of course, killing anyone on the gun crew itself. The next command is to dry sponge, at which point he'll just grab another sponge. This one's a little drier than the first one, run it down the interior, and he's just absorbing that excess moisture. Now you notice also at the command to worm or to clean the piece, this gentleman steps in. He places his thumb over the vent here with what is called a thumb stall. Basically, it's just a piece of leather to protect his thumb from the temperature, of course, around the vent itself. And the reason why you do this is, as you heard, when he withdrew that sponge, you heard a suction sound. Well, this closes off any air from rushing in through the vent behind the sponge and providing oxygen to ignite more sparks or to reignite the sparks within the barrel itself. Check the vent. We're just going to check the vent to make sure that the friction primer tube did come out. All right, vent clear. Gunner's post. Gun crew. Yes. Yes. And that's basically the loading and firing procedure for the 6-pounder field artillery piece. It's much the same way as any of the field artillery pieces are fired, whether it's a Napoleon, 3-inch ordnance rifle, or Parrott rifle, some of the federal guns used extensively during the war. And also very similar to the drill when you get to the heavy Seacoast guns like at Fort Morgan. The only difference being you have guys assisting in a lot of the positions because the implements, the worm, the sponges, and such are of such length that you have to have assistance to get them in and out of the barrel itself.
Good afternoon. My name is Carl M. Lasik from Silver Hill, Alabama. I'm a reenactor with the 1st and 2nd Infantry Division. My job is to set up living history displays and talk a little bit about what I set up. I build a lot of living histories, reenactments, USO dances, etc., etc. And one of my hobbies here is doing a World War II reenacting. I have a display set up in honor of the World War II veterans, so they won't be around forever, and I try to support them best I can. Most of my items are original items. My rifles are original. I have a 1903 A3 Remington, which some people mistake as a Springfield, which is the same basic type weapon. Also have a 1945 M1 Garand, semi-automatic rapid-fire weapon. which is original. Backpacks, I have original, and trenching tools original. Some of it is a little bit of mix and match type stuff, but I try to get the most original stuff as I can. The tents, that's a 2-man pup tent. The reason the branches are around it, because when you're out in the woods, out in the brush, you need to seek cover and concealment best you can. My helmet is also camouflaged. The net is for the vegetation purposes. It breaks, you put vegetation into your camo net to break the outline of your helmet, to break the outline. And you need to change your vegetation out on the helmet the same way as on your tents and equipment. Some people use burlap on your weapons. They'll wrap burlap on their weapons or put branches on them to break the outline. On your vehicles, if you have vehicles, you need to camouflage your vehicles. You keep your windshields down. You cover them with burlap sacks or vegetation. The headlights, you cover them with mud or any type of vegetation that permits. Any shiny parts on the vehicles, you need to keep camouflaged. It's in the same way with parking them in the woods. You need to keep the outline of the vehicles, the outline of them camouflaged, break the outline.
What we'll be doing within the next month or so is completing the Civil War monument. As you can see, as indicated on the drawing here, we'll be placing war memorial monuments in certain areas that will complete this grassed area, and will give you a view over into the woodland and down into what used to be a holding pond for the logging industry. This knoll will be grassed, it will be landscaped, and should be one of the first things you see when you drive in and walk into Baldwin County's Bicentennial Park. It's this beautiful memorial to the fallen from different wars in Baldwin County. Here in Stockton today, talking with Miss Davita Hasty, a longtime resident of Stockton and local historian. And Miss Hasty, would you mind telling us a little bit about the origins of Stockton? I think it's interesting where Stockton began, and it's also incredibly interesting the way in which Stockton has moved over the years to its present location.
In the beginning, when our citizens first started moving in here, of course the Indians were here, but when the settlers started moving in, we were the Mississippi Territory. And none of the areas here, including Stockton, had a name. Stockton got its first post office in 1834 with Gerald Burns Jr. as postmaster. And they were located on the banks of the Tensas River, where Bacon Macmillan and the landing for bringing freight and things before the causeway was ever put across the bay. And so they bought all the freight, and if you went to Mobile, you went by boat, usually on the barges that went to get the freight. And we were down there for a number of years. It was a town, a rough town, as I understood. They had saloons, they had hotels, they incorporated the town at that site in 1839. And when they held election, they had barrels of liquors there, and everybody got drunk, and a lot of people, and some of them got into fights. And I feel like this, I haven't documented it, but they moved up what we call on the hill, where Stockton is at this time, somewhere around 1840 in that area, because a lot of the citizens down there wanted a better lifestyle. They came up on the hill and built a church they called the Union Church, and it dates back, its membership, to 1847. And that's why I'm saying it was in the 40s that they came up on the 1840s that they came up on the hill. William Kitchen laid out the town of Stockton on the Tensas River, and he sold half of the undeveloped part of the town to Ward Taylor for half interest in the stage line. The land at that area was originally occupied by Tensaw Indians. And later, Major Robert Farmer of British West Florida, he was Commandant of British West Florida, retired from over in Mobile on the banks of the Tensaw River where the Tensaw Indians were, and this was around 1775. And Pickett says it was near the modern Stockton when it was on the river. And then, as I say, in the 1840s, now William Kitchen was the brother-in-law to Joshua Kennedy that has ties with North Baldwin and Mobile County.
Miss Hasty, you've been a lifelong resident of the area. Could you tell us a little bit about your history here and things that you've seen change over the years as you've lived in Stockton?
Very much has changed in Stockton, and of course my first memories was coming along in the Depression years after Stockton was developed up at where it is now. And people were, I suppose, closer at that time because everybody had to help everybody else. We really didn't think we were in a bad shape because where we lived we had plenty to eat, we used firewood then, and we had plenty of warmth, and as I say, everybody was helpful to everybody else. If you had something that someone else didn't have, they got it. Children very often got hand-me-down toys and hand-me-down clothes, but we didn't know any better, and we were happy.
Well, the first thing you notice when you drive through Stockton, some of the more historic homes, could you tell us a little bit about some of the homes along the highway here on 59, and a little bit about how old they are and how long they've been here and who originally owned some of them? I know one of the homes that we've toured in the past was the site of an early stagecoach route. Could you elaborate on that any?
Yes, the stage came into Old Stockton, and it also came on up in the 1840s to William Kitchen's home, which is still in existence. It's owned by the Hickson and family, and it's been in the same family, only two owners to it in its life. It is still standing, and the stage would come in and they'd swap drivers and horses, I assume, there, and go on into Purdue Hill, Claiborne, and then sometimes through Monroe, Bunt Cohen, and into Montgomery, and the old federal, it hit the federal road that went through to Fort Mims, and they had a Mims Ferry there. That was a little prior to our town of Stockton, though. But when the railroad come through, it more or less killed the town of Stockton because we were second, I believe, to Mobile in those early years. But as transportation changed, our area changed too. I can't say it changed for the worse. We were mostly all relatives that was here. It was a quiet, peaceful town, and we had the churches here, and most everybody at that time were church members, and a big part of it, and a school too that drew people together. People are so scattered now, and families too, you don't have the closeness that you did in those years.
Well, Stockton's remarkable in that it's really the core of the early history of Baldwin County. It's located near Fort Mims. It's also located near a site that Ms. Hasty and I and several members of the Baldwin County community are working toward utilizing for a bicentennial site in 2009. If you would, Ms. Hasty, tell us a little bit about the bicentennial site. It's located approximately 2 miles south of Stockton on State Highway 225. It's on Hasty Lake, which is a tributary of the Tensas River. And we've got numerous plans for the site, but it is very historical. It's a very valuable site culturally because of white settlement early in Baldwin County's history, and also because of the Native American presence here prior to that. If you would, please tell us a little bit about that site.
That site is part of and lies between, I will use old names and modern names too. In the olden times, Major Farmer's site, Cornelius McCurtain's Kennedy Farmer bought land from Cornelius McCurtain, and it came down. So that site is in the land that is owned, was owned by Cornelius McCurtain and also by later Robert Farmer. And it lies between what we call Lower Bryant's Landing now and Live Oak Landing. Live Oak also was within that perimeter and has a small Indian mound there. And on this particular site that the county has is part of that whole Indian village of the Tensas Indians. And there was particularly a site we call Hamilton Bluff now, which is a modern name, but it is a site that where the Indians were living on what we call at this time Hamilton Creek, which runs into Hasty Lake, and early Hasty Lake was called called McCurtain's Creek, but when the Hasties and Kennedys put mills in there, it picked up different names. But this bicentennial site lies within that land.
You've mentioned several historic names of, if not original members of the Stockton community, at least people who moved in here at an early date. What were some of the reasons they moved here? What were some of the industries that propelled people into the local community?
Well, I have one friend here that's told people when you come not to pull off your shoes, because if you got mud between your toes, you wouldn't leave. So that might be one reason, and I always tell everybody that if they want to be happy, come to Baldwin County. If they want to be real happy, come to God's country, come to Stockton. And we do go back a long way, and can truly say that from our historical beginning until now, that it has been a joy to be here.
One of the earliest industries that I'm well aware of, but you know more of than I do, is timber, which really drove the Baldwin County economy until very recently. It, along with agriculture, were well established long before tourism ever became such a large industry in the county. Could you tell us a little bit about the timber industry around Stockton?
The timber industry was a survival, I would say, almost of all of Baldwin County in the early history. We had a shingle mill here. We had a heading mill that made barrel stays and things, and we had turpentine, and according to some historical articles left, we had 3-mast schooners to come all the way up to the Stockton area on the Tensas River that came from Liverpool and took naval goods back because they treated the sails with the rosin in some way, and they also used the tar and stuff in the caulking of the ships and boats. So the timber came real early, aside from, it's hardly a creek up here that you can cross over that isn't named for somebody that had a sawmill on it. And so many of the homes were built by people that cut their own lumber. And when I say lumber and trees, you can't imagine, they don't even have saws around here now that'll cut through the size longleaf pine that we used to have. We went almost from that into the paperwood industry that brought in a rotation farming of pine trees that eliminated the longleaf pine. But we have been timber oriented in one way or another all the life of this area.
Skipping ahead a few generations, I know that Stockton community has been really busy lately trying to formulate a plan for the future to enable residents of Stockton that are here now to maintain Stockton as it is and also monitor growth. Could you elaborate a little bit on your plans and how you and the group of concerned citizens hope to monitor that growth?
The community is working with Auburn University to develop a plan for Stockton that will lay out a community that will allow them to I guess you would say, try to keep its atmosphere, hopefully the culture that we have had, and we feel like that if they can steer our community into something like that, that we can continue to be the type community that we were and hope for.
Well, as you were talking about in your father's time and how people got back and forth mainly by horse and buggy into events or dances or other things that took place in those communities. DeVita, I remember in high school days right there in Bay Minette with me, Pine Grove Road and all that community out there was a dirt road, and I walked back and forth to Pine Grove to visit friend. Odell Robinson lived out there.
And it was even safe then.
It was, and you could walk, you know, at night, and about the only light you had was the light of the moon or the stars, but you weren't afraid to walk those distances, and now it'd be unheard of, seeming to would, and it's just a lot of communities that have many good memories for people. Now those children are coming back and want to hear about these and rediscover some of these communities, and I hope what we're doing, DeVita, is making that more possible.
Easy for them to.
Yeah.
While we're talking about the area, though, it is interesting. It's hard to tell once you get to Stockton much difference between here, at least through almost to the county line, because we all either relatives or schoolmates or close friends. And but it would be interesting to say, now, we have been Stockton ever since it was on the Tensas River. Latham was Red Hill. Tensas was Montgomery Hill. Blackshear was Montpelier. And Little River has remained its name. And a lot of the names was later was picked up by the postmaster. They named like Red Hill, Latham. When the post office was there, Latham Cooper was made postmaster, so they started, he named it Latham. Now exactly how Montpelier changed to Blackshear, I think Blackshear had a mill there on Turkey Creek maybe. It is interesting to note that it wasn't in Stockton exactly, although Stockton had schools and a lot of different homes here that educated relatives taught in, but Tensas had the first public school in the state of Alabama here in North Baldwin County. And I believe the Pierce brothers at Fort Pierce had the first cotton gin, and several first. This part of the Baldwin County had a number of the first for Alabama, not just Baldwin County. So, as I say, we have been here a long time, and we have introduced a lot of things into the county that so many people don't know about.
My first memories of Mama started, I guess, with my brother and I as just little kids when she used to dress us as twins. And for a couple of weeks we are, because it's only, his birthday is February the 6th and mine is February the 28th. And for a long time we looked just alike, and she would dress us as twins. She was always a tomboy. She used to say that she wore pants as a woman before that was in fashion, and she did. And she always reminded me of Audrey Hepburn in looks in her younger years. And then one day I saw an article on Audrey Hepburn, and it was talking about how she dressed that same way. So to me that was very interesting that she reminded me of her, and in a lot of ways they were a lot alike. But there are a lot of memories of Mama and Daddy and all of us at Live Oak. Daddy and Mama ran that for about 30 years. And I can remember her putting us under the hydrant at the landing, and that was our bath for the night, because they stayed down there late waiting on all the boats to come in. And so we would get a bath under the hydrant, and most of our meals were eaten out of mine and my brother's meals were eaten out of a candy box top with a popsicle spoon, and we'd have Vienna sausage and pork and beans and potato chips, and it was just the best tasting stuff you've ever tasted in your life. And then every once in a while we would, she would go out, and I remember one time she dug a pit in the dirt and showed us how to do sweet potatoes. And we had those. She loved horses. Even before she got married to Daddy, she rode and loved horses. She used to drive trucks for her daddy. She loved hunting, and she used to tell tales about the fox hunting trips that her daddy and her had gone on. And she always loved people. She always had friends. She never met anybody that she didn't care about. And she was comfortable with a person that had nothing, and she was just as comfortable with the President of the United States. She hated history in school and used to talk about how her grades were bad in school, and all of her teachers would be turning over in their grave if they knew some of the things that had been said about her in later years, because she did hate history so much. But not long before Daddy died, I say not long, it was probably 10 years or so. It was after her mother died, basically, because for years Mama had, well, this was my daddy's mother's home place. So they always lived in the Hasty home place. So there was always big grandmother, that was Daddy's mother, and little grandmother, that was Mama's mother. And in their later, older years, we had both grandmothers. We lived with one, and then the other one was moved in here too. And Mama kind of had, in their sickly end of their life, she had a lot of responsibility with being here and making sure they were okay and tending to stuff like that. But after that time, she got involved in the Baldwin County Historical Society. And that was about the first time she had ever been involved in something, well, the church she was involved with, but something that wasn't really family oriented. It was basically something that she just became interested in. And it all started with that. And Daddy used to call it the Hysterical Society. When she would start to go to a meeting, he said, "Well, Vita, where are you going? The Hysterical Society?" And she would say yes. And she really got involved in it. And things that happened long ago took on a very, it just captivated her. And that's what started Mama, and well, I guess she always had a love of Indian pottery and stuff like that before then, and picking up pottery pieces at the Landon, she would do that. And but she really got interested in history, and it became a very big part of her life. And it was mainly the history of the county, although she would read pieces about history in the state and even out of state, and she never used to read before that, but then she would read everything concerning things that happened, and she had a very good talent of being able to retain everything she read, which is very much unlike me. But people would call her from all over. I know a guy called her from, whether it was Canada, Australia, I think it was Australia. And he was trying to find out something that happened here. And he got directed to Mother, and Mother answered his question. Mama might not always have the answer right exactly when you called her, but she never failed to, one, take the time to try to find out the answer for you, because she had done a lot of genealogy work herself in collecting our family's history. And she knew how important it was to get help, and if somebody knew something, to share it with you so you could complete what you were trying to do. So she would always end up tracking down what you needed. And people just knew if they wanted to know something, call Mama and she'd get you the answer. If she didn't have it, she'd find it. Of course, there wasn't much she couldn't answer. I'm prejudiced, I know, but she collected a whole lot of history. She has books in her office on just about any topic that you could ask for. She kept all the quarterlies, a copy of all the quarterlies. She's got a lot of the digs that were done at different things at Fort Mims, at Kennedy's Mill, all the dig reports and archaeological reports. And people would send them to her because they knew, I mean, the people that did them mainly worked with her in getting permission to do it and in doing it, and they would always send her a copy of that. So she has a host of historical information compiled, but there is a host of historical information that went with her. She was just a great person. And I remember the day after she died, I had to go to Bay Minette too. I was getting some yellow roses for her to put on her casket. And there was this older man that I didn't know. And he was probably the first person I'd seen that day. And I pulled into the Winn-Dixie parking lot and was walking in. And he stopped and rolled his window down. And I don't know his name. He was just a local Joe. But he mentioned Mama and how much she meant to him, and he was so sorry to hear about her death. And I haven't met a person. And like I say, it didn't matter. I don't know half of them that didn't remember Mama, that Mama hadn't spoken to and taken time to talk to at the post office or wherever she might meet them. She made it a point to everybody mattered to Mama. And everybody was comfortable around Mama. Nobody was better than another person in her mind.
My mother was quite a unique lady. She was, number one, she was a very devout Christian lady. She went to Presbyterian church. She taught Bible school every year. She worked in the church. My sister and I attended Bible school every year. I had the opportunity to live here in the house for about a year with my younger daughter, and she attended Bible school every year. And so Mother was, like I say, a very strong Christian person and believed in being a very Christian person, being part of your life. She was very devoted to her husband, John Hasty, and they were very close. They owned and operated Live Oak Landing for 30, 35 years and were pretty well inseparable. And Mama, when she was down at the landing, started finding pieces of pottery and stuff like that when they were doing clearing for some of the stores and campgrounds. And I think that kind of got her interested in history, and she started spending a little bit of time trying to research who was there before. But then my father died when he was 62 years old, and it left a big void in my mother's life. And I think she filled that void because she enjoyed history. And to kind of fill that void, that loss she had, she started getting more involved in history. She started researching the Hasty side of the family, and which my grandmother was a Macmillan, and so she researched the Macmillan side and the Hasty side. And when she completed that side, then she started on the Richardson side, researching the family tree, and she traced it all the way back to Scotland on both sides. And I think on the Richardson side of the family, even traced one of them back to the Mayflower that came over on the Mayflower. And as she did this research, you know, it just opened up more windows of opportunity to find different things, and it just led from one thing to another thing. And then as Mama got older and Lynn and myself were coming up, she always said, you know, I want this area, and she extremely loved Baldwin County. And especially if you knew my mother very well, she loved North Baldwin especially. And she was afraid that you know, as the older people died out, nobody would really know what happened here, or the history wouldn't be passed down. So she was very active in getting all of the old historical sites, plaques put up, mill sites that were gone, or a tanning factory that was in Stockton, having signs put up where people could come through Stockton and see the history that was here. And she wanted the community she wanted stuff not to be left for her, but she wanted it to be left for the generations to come. She wanted the people to have an area that they could come to and live here, and that they could really enjoy, and the children of the area could enjoy it and pass it on down to their children, and that they would know what happened here before them. So she became president of the Historical Society in Baldwin County, and I don't know how long she stayed there, but then she did a lot of work for the Montgomery Historical Society. I know she worked with the Naval Museum that they were doing in Mobile. She worked on that some. The walls in this hall couldn't hold all the plaques that she's received and awards she's gotten from the governor. I know Governor George Wallace gave her one. She's just received numerous awards from the county, but she never put them out. She was a person that she did what she wanted to do, but The awards were great, but that wasn't what she was doing all this for. So most of them sat on the closet shelf and never were even put out. But you know, she was just a great lady. She was an inspiration to the community. She, you know, was the kind of person that had a kind heart that people, she used to be known as the deer lady because people would find deer out in the woods and they didn't know what to do with it, so they would come by here and give it to her, and she would raise it on a bottle. And then after it got raised, she would turn it loose in the field, and at one time we probably had 10 or 15 deer here, and people would come over from Mobile or pull up in the yard and feed the deer. So a lot of people would say, well, you were from Stockton. I said, well, do you know the deer lady? And I said, yeah, I know the deer lady. That's my mother. She raised them all. But then eventually they, you know, the deer got wild and they returned back to the wild. But she would, I mean, any kind of animal she saw hurt, you know, she would raise it. She would take care of it and put it back into nature. And she was always, you know, also the same way with people. She looked after not only my sister and I, but she tried to look after the other kids in the community. And if she saw somebody doing something wrong, she would be the first one to call them aside and have a talk with them and say, look, you're not going in the right direction. You need to sit down and think about what you're doing. And to give you, for instance, we had one child from Atmore, and his family had a trailer down at our landing, Live Oak, and he ran away from home. And he was adopted. My mother was also adopted. And so she called his parents up. She said, look, I know y'all having some troubles with your son. And he was probably maybe in the 9th grade at that time. And she said, let him stay here with me for a while. So she brought him up here to the house. He stayed with us probably 2 months. And Mama talked to him and had a lot of talks with him. And the boy changed his life. I won't say he changed his life, but he realized that he wasn't the only person that was adopted at that time. And I think it really helped for him to be able to talk, you know, to my mother and helped him out. But she was always helping people like that. She was a people person. So she helped the community from a people person wise, to give them advice, to straighten their life out, to let them know where their ancestors came from and where their grandparents are buried. And she had people from, you know, all over the world, from Europe, Canada, you know, would call up and say, you know, we've traced our roots back to Baldwin County. Can you tell me where my grandfather might be buried? And like my sister said earlier, it might take a week, it might take a month, but she would write them back and say, yes, you know, they're buried in Perdita, or they're buried in the Swift Cemetery in Bon Secours. But she would always have an answer for them. If people called the archives up at the state of Alabama, you know, and it was about something in Baldwin County or even in the southern part of the state, they would tell her, say, look, you need to contact DeVita Hasty. She's the authority on that area down there, and you know, she can fill you in on what's going on in that area, and she can fix, you know, she can get that information for you. So she left some big shoes to fill. She wants my sister and myself to help carry on and keep this information available to the public, and you know, to try and to fulfill some of those goals, to help this community stay where it is and go where it needs to be and have the right kind of growth where it'll be a great community for the future generations to come.
Is that we don't want to lose all of the good that was here and has been here, and most of them were cultured people. I know my grandmother, my mother-in-law went to Barton Academy and then was sent on to a northern state to study further. So many of the older people here, well, they bought their own education after that, but they knew education was a very important part of citizenship. And I just think it's a great place to live, and I would hate for somebody, I've enjoyed all of my life, and I would hate to think that somebody else couldn't come behind and enjoy the same thing.